Welcome to the Sleep Story Haven, your peaceful sanctuary where the whispers of ancient forests meet the gentle rhythm of moonlit shores. Here, time slows to the rhythm of your breathing. Worries dissolve like mist, and your mind finds the peace it's been seeking. Each story is crafted to guide you through enchanted landscapes and tranquil moments, designed to quiet your thoughts and prepare your spirit for deep, restorative sleep. So find your most comfortable position, close your eyes, and let tonight's gentle tale carry you to the peaceful dreams that await. Welcome to your sleep story haven. Take a deep breath and let our story begin. The Keeper of Gentle Records. Chapter 1: The Quiet Seeker. The evening air held the kind of softness that whispered of distant meadows and forgotten dreams. Elena moved through her small apartment with careful steps, each footfall a gentle percussion against the worn wooden floors that had absorbed countless stories over the decades. The day had been long, filled with the usual chorus of obligations and expectations. But now, as twilight painted the windows in shades of lavender and gold, she felt the familiar call toward something different, something that existed beyond the boundaries of her ordinary world. She had always been drawn to the unusual, the extraordinary moments that lived quietly in the margins of human experience. Tonight, that pull felt stronger than ever, like a current of warm water carrying her toward an unknown shore. Elena settled into her favorite armchair, the one her grandmother had passed down to her, its fabric worn smooth by generations of seekers who had found solace in its embrace. The chair seemed to understand her need for comfort, molding itself to her body as if it had been waiting all day for this moment of reunion. In her lap rested a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with careful notes about the world's most remarkable achievements, not the kind that filled newspaper headlines or trophy cases, but the gentle, persistent records that spoke to something deeper in the human spirit. She had been collecting these stories for years, drawn to the patience and dedication they represented, the longest fingernails grown with love and care, the loudest burp that had made a child laugh with delight, the most toilet seats broken by someone's head in 1 minute, not in anger or frustration, but in the joyful pursuit of something beautifully absurd. Each record told a story of human persistence, of individuals who had found their own unique way to leave a mark on the world. Elena understood this impulse intimately in her own quiet way. She had spent years seeking something that felt authentic, something that connected her to the vast tapestry of human experience. The records fascinated her not because they were strange, but because They were deeply human expressions of creativity, dedication, and the irrepressible urge to transform the ordinary into something memorable. As she opened the journal, the pages released a faint scent of vanilla and old paper, a fragrance that had become associated in her mind with discovery and peace. The streetlights outside began their gentle awakening, casting long shadows that danced across her walls like friendly spirits. Elena felt her breathing slow. Her shoulders released their accumulated tension as she prepared to embark on what had become her nightly ritual, a journey into the world of gentle records, where achievement was measured not in competition, but in the quiet satisfaction of doing something remarkable simply because it called to the soul. The first story that caught her attention tonight was about a woman named Margaret, who had spent 30 years growing her fingernails, not for fame or recognition, but as a meditation on patience and the beauty of natural growth. Elena could almost feel the weight of those nails, the way they would catch the light and create their own gentle music as Margaret moved through her daily life. There was something profoundly peaceful about the image. A woman who had found a way to carry art with her wherever she went, who had transformed her own body into a living testament to the power of time and careful attention. The apartment grew quieter as the city settled into its evening rhythm. Elena could hear the distant hum of traffic, the occasional laugh from a passerby, the soft whisper of wind through the trees that lined her street. These sounds didn't disturb her. Instead, they formed a gentle symphony that seemed to support her journey inward. She felt her eyelids growing heavy, not with exhaustion, but with the kind of peaceful tiredness that comes from allowing the mind to wander into spaces of beauty and wonder. As she continued reading, Elena began to notice a curious thing happening. The stories in her journal seemed to be calling to her more insistently tonight, as if they were inviting her to step beyond the role of observer and into something more participatory. The words on the page began to shimmer slightly, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, and she found herself wondering what it would be like to meet these record holders, to understand their motivation, not just intellectually, but experientially. The thought brought a gentle smile to her lips. Elena had always been someone who preferred the quiet corners of experience, who found her deepest satisfaction in moments of solitude and reflection. The idea of seeking out these remarkable individuals felt both thrilling and perfectly natural, as if it were a path she had been preparing to walk for years. Without realizing it, she closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the sensation of possibility to wash over her. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she could almost see a landscape of gentle achievements stretching out before her like a vast garden. where every flower bloomed according to its own unique schedule. The image filled her with a sense of profound peace, as if she had been given a glimpse of a world where competition was replaced by celebration, where every individual accomplishment was valued not for its superiority, but for its authenticity. When Elena opened her eyes again, the journal in her lap seemed to glow with a soft, inviting light. The stories she had collected over the years appeared to be organizing themselves, forming a pathway that led from her current life into something larger and more mysterious. She felt no fear at this transformation, only a deep sense of rightness, as if the universe had finally aligned to show her the next step in her journey toward understanding and peace. The clock on her mantle chimed softly, marking another hour's passage into the realm of dreams and possibilities. Elena knew that tomorrow would bring its own responsibilities and challenges, but tonight belonged to something different. Tonight, she would follow the gentle call of these extraordinary records, allowing them to guide her toward a deeper understanding of what it meant to achieve something meaningful in a world that often seemed to value speed over substance, quantity over quality. She took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs with possibilities as infinite as the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky outside her window. The journey was about to begin, and Elena welcomed it with the open heart of someone who had finally found her true calling. Not just to collect stories of remarkable achievements, but to discover the profound peace that lay hidden within each patient, persistent act of gentle record-making. Chapter 2: The Garden of Patient Achievements. The journal's pages rustled with an almost musical quality as Elena turned to a story that had always captured her imagination. It was about a man named Thomas who had spent 15 years cultivating what would become the world's longest fingernails, each one a testament to the beauty of uninterrupted growth. As she read, the words seemed to lift from the page, forming images so vivid that she could almost feel the cool morning air of Thomas's garden, where he would sit each day, carefully tending to his remarkable appendages. In her mind's eye, Elena found herself walking along a cobblestone path that wound through a landscape unlike any she had ever imagined. The air here was thick with the scent of jasmine and honeysuckle, and everywhere she looked, she saw examples of patient achievement growing like flowers in carefully tended beds. To her left, a woman sat beneath a willow tree, her hair flowing around her like a river of silver light. This was Sarah, whose hair had grown for 40 years without ever being cut, creating a living waterfall that reached nearly to the ground. Elena approached Sarah with the gentle respect one might show to a master gardener. someone who had discovered secrets that could only be learned through years of quiet dedication. Sarah looked up with eyes that held the peace of someone who had found perfect harmony between intention and patience. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the soft rhythm of someone who had learned to move through the world without haste. "Welcome, dear one," Sarah said, her words floating on the evening air like petals released from a bloom. "I see you've come to understand what we've learned here, that true achievement is not about surpassing others, but about allowing something beautiful to unfold in its own time." Elena nodded, feeling a deep resonance with these words. She had spent so many years trying to rush toward goals, to force outcomes that needed time to develop naturally. Here, in this garden of patient achievements, she sensed a different way of being, one that honored the natural rhythms of growth and development. As they walked together, Sarah began to share the story of her journey. "When I first decided to grow my hair," she said, her voice taking on the cadence of someone sharing a beloved fairy tale, "I thought it was simply about achieving a record, but as the years passed, I began to understand that the hair was growing me as much as I was growing it. Each morning, as I brushed these strands, I was reminded of the power of consistency, of showing up day after day to tend to something larger than myself." Elena felt a wave of understanding wash over her. This was what she had been seeking, not just stories about unusual achievements, but insight into the transformative power of patient dedication. The hair that flowed around Sarah was not just a record, it was a living meditation on the beauty of allowing things to unfold naturally, without forcing or rushing. They continued walking, and Elena noticed that the path beneath their feet seemed to pulse with a gentle energy, as if the earth itself was celebrating the remarkable achievements that had taken root in this space. To their right, they encountered a small clearing where a man sat surrounded by what appeared to be the most elaborate fingernails Elena had ever seen. Each nail was like a work of art, curved and sculpted by time into shapes that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. This was Thomas, whose dedication to growing his nails had created what could only be described as natural sculpture. He looked up as they approached, his face radiant with the kind of joy that comes from doing something that perfectly aligns with one's deepest nature. His nails, Elena realized, were not just long, they were beautiful, each one unique in its curve and coloring, like individual masterpieces created through the collaboration between human intention and natural growth. "The secret," Thomas said, as if he had been waiting for Elena to arrive so he could share this wisdom, "is learning to work with your body rather than against it. These nails taught me patience, but more than that, they taught me to listen. Each nail grew at its own pace, developed its own character. My job was simply to provide the right conditions and then trust the process. Elena felt her breathing deepen as she absorbed this teaching. In her own life, she had often struggled with impatience, with the desire to see results immediately. Here, surrounded by the evidence of what could be achieved through gentle persistence, she began to understand that true accomplishment might be less about forcing outcomes and more about creating the conditions for natural development. As the evening deepened, the garden seemed to come alive with a soft, internal light. Elena realized that each achievement here was not just a record. It was a doorway into a deeper understanding of what it meant to live in harmony with natural rhythms. The people she met were not competitors, but collaborators, each one contributing to a collective understanding of how patience and dedication could transform both the individual and their environment. Sarah's hair caught the moonlight as she continued to share her story, and Elena found herself mesmerized by the way the silver strands seemed to hold starlight within their lengths. "You know," Sarah said, her voice taking on an even more peaceful quality, "the most remarkable thing about growing my hair was not the length it achieved, but the way it changed my relationship with time itself. I stopped seeing time as something to be conquered and started experiencing it as something to be embraced." Thomas nodded in agreement, his sculptural nails creating gentle music as he gestured. "Yes, and I discovered that achievement is not about impressing others, but about finding the courage to follow your own unique path, even when others might not understand it. These nails became my teachers, showing me that beauty can emerge from the most unexpected places when we give it the gift of time and attention." Elena felt tears of recognition gathering in her eyes. These were not tears of sadness, but of the deep relief that comes from finally finding one's tribe, one's true home in the world. She had spent so many years feeling like an outsider, someone whose interests and inclinations didn't quite fit into the conventional definitions of success and achievement. Here, in this garden of patient records, she found a different model entirely, one that honored uniqueness, celebrated persistence, and found beauty in the most unexpected places. As they continued their evening walk, Elena noticed that her steps had taken on a different quality. The urgency that usually characterized her movement had been replaced by something more flowing, more natural. She was learning to move at the pace of growth itself, to trust that each step would reveal the next part of her journey when the time was right. The garden seemed to respond to this shift in her energy, revealing new wonders at every turn. She saw a woman who had spent decades perfecting the art of the longest sustained burp, not for shock value, but as a meditation on breath and sound. She met a man who had discovered that breaking toilet seats with his head was not about destruction, but about understanding the precise application of force, the delicate balance between strength and control. Each person Elena encountered had found their own unique way of engaging with the world, their own method of creating something remarkable through patience and dedication. More importantly, each had discovered that the journey toward their record was more transformative than the achievement itself. They had learned to find peace in the process, to celebrate the small daily victories that accumulated over time into something extraordinary. As the night deepened and the garden settled into its nocturnal rhythm, Elena felt a profound sense of gratitude washing over her. She had come here as a seeker, someone looking for stories to collect and understand, but she was beginning to realize that she had found something much more valuable, a new way of being in the world, one that honored patience, celebrated uniqueness, and found beauty in the most unexpected places. The journal in her hands seemed to pulse with warmth, as if it too was pleased with the discoveries of the evening. Elena knew that this was just the beginning of her journey, that there were many more teachers and lessons waiting to be discovered in this remarkable garden of patient achievements. She felt her eyelids growing heavy, not with exhaustion, but with the peaceful tiredness that comes from being exactly where one belongs, surrounded by kindred spirits who understood the value of slow, gentle, persistent dedication to something beautiful and unique. Chapter 3: The Sanctuary of Sounds. The morning light filtered through the garden with the gentleness of silk curtains, casting everything in shades of pearl and soft gold. Elena woke to find herself resting beneath a canopy of flowering vines, their blossoms releasing a fragrance that seemed to carry the essence of peaceful dreams. The transition from sleep to waking felt seamless, as if her dreams had simply shifted into a different form of reality, one equally gentle and welcoming. Nearby, she could hear the soft murmur of voices, punctuated by sounds that might have seemed unusual in any other context, but here felt perfectly natural and harmonious. As she stretched and oriented herself, Elena realized that she had awakened in a section of the garden dedicated to the achievements of sound, not harsh or jarring noises, but the kinds of sounds that emerge from the human body when it is perfectly at ease with itself. A woman approached, her movement creating a gentle swoosh of fabric against fabric. This was Melody, whose name seemed perfectly suited to her calling. She had spent 23 years perfecting what would become the world's loudest burp. But as she explained to Elena, the journey had been less about volume and more about discovering the musical possibilities hidden within the human digestive system. The secret Melody said, settling beside Elena on the grass that felt as soft as the finest velvet, is understanding that every sound our bodies make is a form of communication. When I first began working with my burping, I was simply trying to make noise. But over time, I began to hear the music in it, the way breath and stomach and throat could work together to create something that was both human and transcendent. Elena listened with fascination as Melody began to demonstrate. The sounds that emerged were nothing like the crude interruptions she might have expected. Instead, they were melodic, rhythmic, almost like a form of vocal percussion that seemed to harmonize with the natural sounds of the garden. Birds responded by adjusting their own songs, creating a kind of interspecies symphony that filled the air with layers of beautiful sound. You see, Melody continued, her voice taking on the quality of someone sharing a profound secret. The body is an instrument, and like any instrument, it can be played with crudeness or with artistry. I chose artistry. Each burp became a note in a longer composition, a way of celebrating the miraculous processes that keep us alive and vibrant. As they sat together, Elena began to notice other practitioners of sound-based achievements scattered throughout this section of the garden. There was a man named Resonance who had developed the ability to make his voice carry for extraordinary distances, not through shouting, but through understanding the acoustics of natural spaces and learning to work with them rather than against them. Sound, Resonance explained when Elena approached him, is not something we force into the world. It's something we allow the world to carry. When I discovered this principle, everything changed. Instead of trying to make my voice louder, I learned to make it clearer, more resonant. The volume came naturally as a result of the clarity. Elena found herself thinking about her own voice, how rarely she used it to express her deepest thoughts and feelings. In her regular life, she often felt as though her words were swallowed by the noise of the world, lost in the general cacophony of modern existence. Here, surrounded by people who had learned to make their voices heard through patience and understanding rather than force, she began to imagine what it might feel like to speak from a place of true clarity and confidence. Melody led Elena to a natural amphitheater formed by the arrangement of ancient trees, their branches creating a cathedral-like space where sound seemed to acquire an almost sacred quality. In the center of this space sat a woman whose presence was so peaceful that Elena felt her own nervous system begin to relax simply by being near her. "This is harmony," Melody said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried perfectly in the acoustically perfect space. She has discovered something that few humans ever achieve: the ability to create sounds that actively promote healing and relaxation in others. Harmony smiled, her expression radiant with the kind of joy that comes from having found one's perfect calling. When she spoke, her voice seemed to resonate not just in Elena's ears, but in her entire body, creating a sensation of being gently embraced by sound itself. "I began my journey with burping," Harmony explained, "much like melody. But I discovered that certain frequencies, certain rhythms, could actually help people release tension and find peace. Over time, I developed what I call therapeutic sound, using the natural resonances of the human body to create healing vibrations." To demonstrate, Harmony began to produce a series of sounds that seemed to emerge from some deep place within her being. They were not quite burps, not quite songs, but something entirely new. A form of vocal expression that bypassed the analytical mind and spoke directly to the body's innate wisdom. Elena felt waves of relaxation washing through her, releasing tensions she hadn't even realized she was carrying. "The key," Harmony continued, "is understanding that healing is not something we do to others, but something we help them remember how to do for themselves. These sounds I create are simply reminders, tuning forks that help people find their own natural frequency of peace and well-being." As the demonstration continued, Elena noticed that other visitors to the garden were drawn to the amphitheater. They came quietly, settling onto the soft grass with the reverence of people entering a sacred space. Some appeared to be carrying burdens, worry lines around their eyes, tension in their shoulders, the slightly harried look of people who had been running too fast for too long. But as they listened to Harmony's therapeutic sounds, Elena watched these visitors transform. Shoulders relaxed, breathing deepened, and expressions softened into the kind of peace that comes from being reminded of one's essential nature. This was not entertainment, but something far more profound, a form of healing that worked through the simple medium of sound. "The most remarkable thing," Melody observed as they watched this transformation, "is that everyone who comes here eventually discovers their own unique way of contributing to the healing. Some become practitioners of sound like Harmony. Others find their gift in creating spaces of silence, or in learning to listen with such depth that people feel truly heard for the first time in their lives." Elena felt a stirring of recognition. She had always been a good listener, someone others sought out when they needed to share their deepest concerns. But she had never thought of this as a talent, much less as something that could be developed into a form of healing practice. Here, in this sanctuary of sounds, she began to understand that her natural inclination toward deep listening might be her own unique contribution to the world of gentle achievements. As the afternoon progressed, Elena found herself drawn to a quieter corner of the sound sanctuary, where a man sat in perfect stillness, his presence so peaceful that even the insects seemed to move more slowly around him. This was silence, whose achievement was not the creation of sound, but the cultivation of its absence. The ability to rest so deeply in quietude that others were naturally drawn into a state of profound peace. The loudest sound, Silence explained, his voice barely above a whisper, is the sound of a mind that has learned to be still. When we stop trying to fill every moment with noise, we discover that silence is not empty, but full of possibility, full of peace, full of the kind of presence that allows healing to occur naturally. Elena spent the rest of the afternoon in this corner of the garden, learning to appreciate the subtle textures of silence, the way it could hold space for others without demanding anything in return. She discovered that silence was not the absence of sound, but a different kind of sound entirely. The sound of attention itself, the sound of complete presence. As evening approached, the sound sanctuary began to settle into its own natural rhythm. The various practitioners of sound achievement gathered in the amphitheater for what Melody called the evening harmonization, a time when all the different sounds of the garden came together in a spontaneous symphony of human expression. Elena listened with wonder as burps transformed into percussion, as extended voices created melody, as the practitioners of silence provided the spaces between notes that allowed the music to breathe. It was unlike anything she had ever heard, not because it was strange, but because it was so natural, so perfectly aligned with the rhythm of life itself. As the harmonization continued, Elena felt something shifting inside her own body. The sounds were awakening memories of her own voice, her own natural rhythms, her own capacity for both sound and silence. She began to understand that her journey through this garden was not just about observing others' achievements, but about discovering her own unique contribution to the great symphony of human expression. The stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, and Elena realized that she was exactly where she needed to be, surrounded by people who had learned to express themselves authentically, who had found their own unique ways of contributing to the healing of the world. The sound sanctuary had taught her that achievement was not about being the loudest or the most attention-grabbing, but about finding one's authentic voice and using it in service of something larger than oneself. As she prepared to rest, Elena felt her body naturally settling into the rhythm of the garden around her. The sounds of the evening, the gentle breathing of her companions, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of water, all seemed to be conspiring to create the perfect conditions for deep, restorative sleep. She was learning to trust the process, to allow her journey to unfold at its own pace, knowing that each day would bring new discoveries and new opportunities for growth. Chapter 4: The Hall of Gentle Strength. The dawn arrived with the softness of a mother's lullaby, carrying with it the promise of new discoveries and deeper understanding. Elena stirred from her rest, feeling more refreshed than she had in years, as if the sounds of the previous evening had not only soothed her mind, but had somehow tuned her entire being to a more harmonious frequency. The transition from the sound sanctuary to what lay ahead felt as natural as breathing, each step of her journey flowing seamlessly into the next. As she walked along the garden path, Elena noticed that the landscape was beginning to change. The delicate flowers and gentle curves of the previous sections were giving way to something more substantial, though no less beautiful. Ancient oak trees lined the pathway, their massive trunks speaking of centuries of patient growth, their branches reaching toward the sky with the confidence of beings who had learned to grow strong through consistency rather than force. The air itself felt different here, not heavier, but more grounded, carrying with it the scent of rich earth and the kind of stability that comes from deep roots. Elena sensed that she was approaching a part of the garden dedicated to achievements of strength, but not the kind of strength that conquered or dominated. This was something else entirely. The strength that comes from understanding one's true nature and expressing it with complete authenticity. A gentle rumbling sound drew her attention to a clearing where a man sat cross-legged on the ground, his presence so centered and peaceful that Elena felt immediately drawn to him. This was Boulder, whose achievement was as unusual as it was impressive. He held the world record for the most toilet seats broken by someone's head in 1 minute. But as Elena approached, she realized that there was nothing violent or destructive about his practice. Instead, there was an almost meditative quality to his preparation. A deep understanding of physics and anatomy that transformed what could have been crude destruction into something approaching art. "Welcome," Boulder said, his voice carrying the resonance of someone who had learned to speak from his center. "I can see you're curious about what I do." Most people are, and most people misunderstand it completely. They think it's about aggression or showing off. But it's really about understanding the perfect application of force, the precise moment when resistance gives way to transformation. Elena settled beside him, intrigued by the calm intelligence in his eyes. Boulder began to explain his practice, and Elena found herself fascinated by the complexity of what had initially seemed like a simple feat of strength. Each toilet seat, Boulder continued, has its own unique density, its own particular way of responding to pressure. My job is to understand these differences instantly, to feel the material's natural breaking point and apply just enough force to create the transformation. Too little and nothing happens. Too much and I could injure myself or create unnecessary violence. The art is in finding the perfect balance. As he spoke, Boulder demonstrated his technique, not by actually breaking anything, but by showing Elena how he had learned to focus his energy, how he had developed the ability to channel force through his body in precise, controlled ways. Elena watched in wonder as he moved through what appeared to be a kind of martial arts form, each movement flowing naturally into the next, each gesture demonstrating a different aspect of controlled power. The key insight, Boulder explained, came when I realized that strength without wisdom is just violence, but wisdom without strength is just philosophy. My practice combines both. I've learned to understand the material world so deeply that I can interact with it in ways that appear impossible, but are actually just applications of natural law. Elena found herself thinking about the areas of her own life where she had always felt she lacked strength, not physical strength, but the kind of inner strength that allows a person to remain centered in the face of challenges, to respond to difficulties with wisdom rather than reactivity. Here, watching Boulder demonstrate his practice, she began to understand that true strength was not about overpowering others, but about developing such a deep understanding of natural principles that one could work with them rather than against them. Boulder led Elena to a section of the garden where several other practitioners of gentle strength were engaged in their own unique forms of achievement. There was precision, a woman who had developed the ability to break specific numbers of objects with perfect accuracy, not through force, but through understanding the geometric principles that governed how materials responded to pressure. The beauty of this work, Precision explained, her voice carrying the clarity of someone who had discovered profound truths through practical application, is that it teaches you to see the world as it really is, not as you wish it were or fear it might be. Every material has its own nature, its own way of responding to different kinds of touch. My job is to understand these natures so deeply that I can predict exactly how they will behave. Elena watched as Precision demonstrated her technique, using her hands to explore the surface of various objects, reading their density and structure with the sensitivity of a master musician tuning an instrument. There was something profoundly meditative about the way she worked, a kind of focused attention that seemed to create a dialogue between her consciousness and the material world. Over time, Precision continued. I began to realize that this same principle applies to all of life. People, situations, challenges They all have their own natural ways of responding to different kinds of energy. When I learned to read these patterns, I found that I could navigate even the most difficult circumstances with grace and effectiveness. As the morning progressed, Elena encountered more practitioners of gentle strength, each one having discovered their own unique way of working with the principles of force and resistance. There was flexibility, who had learned to bend objects not by overpowering them, but by understanding their natural grain and working with it. There was patience, who had discovered that the strongest force in the universe was often the gentlest, the slow, steady pressure that could reshape even the most resistant materials over time. Each practitioner Elena met had learned to see strength not as domination, but as a form of collaboration with the natural world. They had developed abilities that appeared superhuman, but were actually expressions of principles that were available to anyone willing to invest the time and attention necessary to understand them deeply. The most remarkable practitioner Elena encountered was a woman named Harmony, who had discovered that the most powerful force of all was not force at all, but the ability to create resonance. She had learned to tune her own energy to match the natural frequency of whatever she was working with, allowing her to achieve results that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The secret, Harmony explained, her voice carrying the resonance of someone who had learned to speak from the deepest place within herself, is understanding that everything in the universe is vibration. When you learn to match your vibration to the natural frequency of whatever you're working with, resistance disappears. You're no longer fighting against the world, you're dancing with it. Elena spent the afternoon learning from these remarkable practitioners, each one offering a different perspective on what it meant to be truly strong. She began to understand that the achievements she was witnessing were not about breaking things or demonstrating power over others, but about developing such a deep understanding of natural principles that one could work with them in ways that appeared miraculous, but were actually expressions of profound wisdom. As the day progressed, Elena found herself drawn to a quiet corner of the strength sanctuary, where a man sat in perfect stillness, his presence so grounded and peaceful that even the earth around him seemed to radiate stability. This was Foundation, whose achievement was not the breaking of objects, but the cultivation of unshakable inner strength. The ability to remain centered no matter what external challenges might arise. True strength, Foundation explained, his voice carrying the deep resonance of someone who had learned to speak from the earth itself, is not about what you can do to the world, but about what the world cannot do to you. When you develop this kind of inner foundation, you become a source of stability for others, a place where they can rest and find their own strength. Elena spent the rest of the afternoon with foundation, learning to feel the connection between her own body and the earth beneath her. She discovered that strength was not something that had to be built from nothing, but something that was already present, waiting to be recognized and developed. The earth itself was offering its support, its own ancient strength available to anyone willing to sink their roots deep enough to access it. As evening approached, the practitioners of gentle strength gathered in the central clearing for what Boulder called the evening demonstration. Not a competition or performance, but a sharing of the different ways they had learned to work with the principles of force and resistance. Elena watched in wonder as each practitioner demonstrated their unique approach, not to impress others, but to contribute to the collective understanding of what was possible when strength was combined with wisdom. She saw Boulder break a perfect number of toilet seats with such precision and grace that it looked like a dance. She watched precision work with various materials, her touch so sensitive and skillful that the objects seemed to transform themselves at her request. She observed flexibility bend and shape resistant materials with such understanding that they appeared to be cooperating in their own transformation. But perhaps most remarkably, Elena witnessed the way these practitioners supported each other, the way their individual achievements combined to create something larger than any of them could have accomplished alone. They had learned that true strength was not about standing alone, but about contributing to a community of practice where everyone's unique gifts were valued and supported. As the demonstration concluded and the practitioners began to settle into their evening routines, Elena felt a profound sense of gratitude for what she had learned. The Hall of Gentle Strength had taught her that power was not about dominance, but about understanding, not about forcing outcomes, but about working with natural principles to create positive change. She had discovered that strength was not the opposite of gentleness, but its perfect complement. That the most powerful people were often the most gentle, because they understood that true strength came from being so centered in one's own nature that there was no need to prove anything to anyone. They had learned to be strong like the earth itself, supportive, stable, and endlessly generous in their willingness to provide foundation for others. As she prepared for sleep, Elena felt her body naturally settling into the rhythm of the earth beneath her. The strength sanctuary had taught her that achievement was not about conquering the world, but about finding her place within it. Not about proving her worth, but about expressing her unique gifts in service of something larger than herself. She was learning to trust not just the process, but her own capacity to contribute to the great work of healing and transformation that was happening all around her. Chapter 5: The Observatory of Unique Visions. The morning light filtered through the canopy with an ethereal quality, as if the very air had been infused with starlight and dreams. Elena awakened to find herself in a grove where the trees seemed to reach toward the sky with an unusual urgency, their branches intertwining to create natural windows that framed glimpses of the heavens above. The transition from the grounded strength of the previous day to this new space felt like moving from the solid earth into the realm of infinite possibility. As she walked along the gently winding path, Elena noticed that the landscape here was different from anything she had encountered before. The garden beds were arranged in patterns that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle from which she viewed them, creating an optical illusion that suggested depth and movement even in stillness. The air itself seemed to shimmer with a quality that made everything appear slightly more vivid, more alive with potential. A soft voice called her attention to a woman sitting beneath a tree whose branches formed a natural cathedral of light and shadow. This was Iris, whose achievement was as visually stunning as it was personally meaningful. She had spent 17 years allowing her eyelashes to grow to extraordinary lengths, creating a natural veil of beauty that transformed her entire appearance, and more importantly, her entire way of seeing the world. "Welcome to the observatory," Iris said, her voice carrying the gentle cadence of someone who had learned to speak from a place of deep visual awareness. "This is where we gather to explore the achievements that change not just what we can do, but how we see." As she spoke, her remarkable eyelashes caught the light, creating tiny rainbows that danced across her cheeks like living jewelry. Elena was immediately struck by the beauty of Iris's achievement, but even more by the sense of presence it had created. The long lashes seemed to slow down Iris's blinking, creating a quality of attention that was both intense and peaceful. When she looked at Elena, it felt as though she was truly seeing her, not just glancing at her surface, but perceiving something deeper and more essential. "The journey began," Iris explained, "as a simple curiosity about how long my lashes could grow if I never cut them. But as the years passed, I discovered that they were changing more than just my appearance. They were changing my entire relationship with sight itself. When you have lashes this long, you can't rush through visual experiences. Every blink becomes intentional. Every glance becomes a choice." Elena found herself mesmerized by the way Iris moved through the world. There was a deliberateness to her gestures, a quality of attention that seemed to transform everything she looked at. When Iris turned her gaze toward a flower, Elena could almost see the flower responding, seeming to bloom more fully under such focused appreciation. Over time, Iris continued, I began to understand that sight is not passive, but participatory. The way we look at the world actually changes the world we're looking at. These lashes became my teachers, showing me how to look with love rather than judgment, with curiosity rather than assumption, with presence rather than distraction. As they walked together through the observatory, Elena encountered other practitioners of vision-based achievements, each one having discovered their own unique way of engaging with the visual world. There was Spectrum, a man who had trained his eyes to perceive colors that most humans couldn't see, extending his visual range into frequencies that revealed hidden beauty in everyday objects. The key, Spectrum explained, his eyes seeming to glow with an inner light, was learning to quiet the mental chatter that usually filters our perception. When the mind becomes still, the eyes can see with their full capacity. Most people use only a fraction of their visual potential because they're too busy thinking about what they're seeing to actually see it. Elena watched in wonder as Spectrum demonstrated his ability, pointing out subtle variations in color and light that were completely invisible to her untrained eyes. But more than his extraordinary perception, she was struck by the quality of peace that surrounded him. He had clearly found a way to use his unusual gift not just for personal achievement, but as a form of meditation, a way of remaining present and appreciative in each moment. They were joined by a woman named Clarity, whose achievement was the cultivation of perfect vision without any technological assistance. Through years of careful practice and natural techniques, she had not only maintained, but actually improved her eyesight well into her later years, seeing with a sharpness and clarity that most people lost in childhood. The eyes, Clarity explained, her gaze so direct and clear that Elena felt seen in a way that was both comfortable and profound, are not just organs of sight, but organs of understanding. When we learn to see clearly in the physical sense, we often discover that we're also seeing clearly in the emotional and spiritual senses. The practices that improved my vision also improved my insight, my ability to perceive the truth of situations and people. As the morning progressed, Elena found herself drawn deeper into the observatory, where the achievements became increasingly subtle and profound. She met Vision, a woman who had developed the ability to see auras, the energy fields that surrounded living beings. But unlike the dramatic descriptions Elena had read in books, Vision's perception was gentle and practical, used primarily as a tool for understanding how to help others feel more comfortable and at peace. What I see, Vision explained, her voice carrying the soft authority of someone who had learned to trust their own unusual perceptions, is not mystical or otherworldly. It's simply information about how energy moves and where it gets stuck. When someone's energy is flowing freely, they appear surrounded by light and color. When they're stressed or blocked, the patterns are different. My role is simply to reflect back what I see, to help people understand their own energy patterns so they can make choices that support their well-being. Elena spent time learning from vision, discovering that the ability to perceive energy was not as foreign as she had initially thought. As vision guided her through simple exercises in attention and awareness, Elena began to notice subtle differences in how people's presence felt, how spaces held different qualities of energy, how her own state of mind affected what she was able to perceive. The most remarkable practitioner Elena encountered in the observatory was a man named Perspective, whose achievement was the cultivation of what he called dimensional sight. The ability to see the same situation from multiple viewpoints simultaneously. Through years of practice, he had learned to shift his visual perspective at will, seeing scenes from above, below, from inside and outside, creating a kind of three-dimensional understanding that most people could only achieve through imagination. The gift, Perspective explained, his eyes seeming to hold depths that went on forever, is not just the ability to see differently, but the wisdom that comes from understanding that there is no single correct way to see anything. Every viewpoint reveals something true, and every viewpoint also conceals something important. The key is learning to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously to see the fullness of any situation. Elena found herself profoundly moved by this teaching. In her own life, she had often felt trapped by her particular point of view, unable to understand why others saw things so differently. Here, learning from Perspective, she began to grasp that the goal was not to find the one correct way of seeing, but to develop the flexibility to shift between different viewpoints as the situation required. As the afternoon deepened, the observatory revealed one of its most beautiful features, a natural amphitheater where all the practitioners of visual achievement gathered each day for what they called the sharing of sight. Elena watched in wonder as each person demonstrated their unique way of seeing, not to impress others, but to contribute to a collective understanding of the full range of human visual potential. Iris showed how her extended eyelashes created natural filters that revealed hidden patterns in light and shadow. Spectrum demonstrated how his expanded color perception revealed beauty that was hidden in plain sight. Clarity shared techniques for maintaining and improving natural vision. Vision offered readings of the energy patterns that surrounded each person present. Perspective guided the group through exercises in shifting viewpoint, helping everyone experience the liberation that came from seeing familiar things in entirely new ways. But perhaps most beautiful of all was the way these different forms of sight combined and supported each other. Elena realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented, a community of seers who had learned to use their individual gifts in service of collective insight. Each person's unique way of seeing contributed to a fuller understanding of reality than any single perspective could provide. As the sharing concluded, Elena found herself drawn to a quiet corner of the observatory, where an elderly woman sat in perfect stillness. Her eyes closed, but her presence so aware that Elena felt as though she was being seen more clearly than she had ever been seen before. This was inner sight, whose achievement was the cultivation of vision that didn't depend on the physical eyes at all. The greatest sight, inner sight said without opening her eyes, is the sight that sees with the heart rather than the head, that perceives the essence of things rather than just their appearance. This kind of seeing is available to everyone, but it requires the courage to look beyond the surface, to see not just what is, but what could be. Elena spent the rest of the afternoon learning from inner sight, discovering that the most profound vision was often the most subtle. She learned to close her external eyes and open her internal ones, to perceive the qualities of peace and wisdom that surrounded her, to see not just the physical forms of the other practitioners, but the essence of what they had become through their dedicated practice. As evening approached and the natural light began to fade, the observatory took on an entirely different quality. The practitioners of sight gathered in the central amphitheater, not to demonstrate their abilities, but to rest together in the kind of communal silence that only people who truly see each other can share. Elena felt her own vision beginning to shift, not just her physical sight, but her entire way of perceiving the world around her. The observatory had taught her that achievement was not just about developing unusual abilities, but about using those abilities to see more clearly, to understand more deeply, to contribute to a greater understanding of what it meant to be human. She realized that her journey through this garden of gentle records was itself a form of vision quest, a process of learning to see herself and her world with greater clarity and compassion. Each section of the garden had revealed different aspects of human potential, different ways of being in relationship with the natural world and with each other. As she settled into the peaceful rhythm of the evening, Elena felt her eyelids growing heavy with the kind of tiredness that comes from having seen so much beauty that the mind needs time to process and integrate it all. The observatory had shown her that the world was far more beautiful and complex than she had ever imagined, and that the key to accessing this beauty was not special equipment or supernatural gifts, but simply the willingness to look with patience, love, and genuine curiosity. The stars began to appear overhead, and Elena realized that she was learning to see them not just as distant lights, but as part of a vast web of connection that included herself and all the remarkable people she had met on this journey. The observatory had taught her that true vision was not about seeing things that others couldn't see, but about seeing the same things that everyone could see, only with greater depth, appreciation, and wonder. Chapter 6: The Archive of Enduring Dedication. The morning arrived with the gentle persistence of a faithful friend, carrying with it the scent of old books and the promise of deep discoveries. Elena found herself awakening in a grove where ancient oak trees stood like sentinels of time, their massive trunks bearing the marks of decades spent in patient growth. Between their branches, she could glimpse structures that seemed to have grown from the earth itself, buildings that appeared to be part library, part museum, part sanctuary for the most enduring of human achievements. As she walked toward these buildings, Elena noticed that the path beneath her feet was made of stones that had been worn smooth by countless footsteps, each one representing years of dedicated practice by individuals who had learned to transform persistence into art. The very ground seemed to whisper stories of commitment, of daily choices made over and over again, until they became expressions of something approaching the sacred. The first building she entered took her breath away. The walls were lined with displays that showcased achievements requiring not weeks or months, but decades of unwavering dedication. Here was a collection of the world's longest fingernails, each set preserved with the reverence usually reserved for priceless works of art. But these were more than art. They were meditations in keratin, testimonies to the transformative power of daily attention, sustained over years. A woman approached Elena with the quiet grace of someone who had learned to move through the world without haste. This was Patience, the curator of the archive, whose own achievement was visible in the extraordinary length and perfect condition of her fingernails. Each nail was like a scroll, carrying within its growth the story of every day she had chosen dedication over convenience, commitment over impulse. "Welcome to the archive," Patience said, her voice carrying the deep calm of someone who had learned to measure time not in hours, but in seasons. "This is where we preserve the achievements that require not just skill or talent, but the rarest quality of all, the willingness to continue day after day, year after year, regardless of whether anyone is watching or appreciating the effort." Elena found herself drawn to one particular display, where the nails of a woman named Dedication were preserved behind glass. These nails had grown for 37 years, each one a masterpiece of natural sculpture that could never be replicated or rushed. The placard beside the display explained that dedication had spent 3 hours each day caring for her nails, a practice that had taught her patience not just with her nails, but with every aspect of her life. The remarkable thing, Patience explained, following Elena's gaze, is that dedication never set out to break a record. She simply began growing her nails as a form of meditation, a way of practicing patience and attention in a world that seemed to value only speed and efficiency. The record was just a byproduct of her dedication to the practice itself. As they moved through the archive, Elena encountered displays of other long-term achievements that spoke to the extraordinary power of sustained effort. There were photographs documenting the growth of the world's longest hair, showing the same woman year after year as her hair gradually transformed from shoulder length to a magnificent cascade that reached nearly to the ground. "This is flowing," Patience said, indicating the photographs. She discovered that growing her hair was really about growing her patience, her trust in natural processes, her willingness to let something beautiful unfold in its own time. The hair was just the visible expression of an internal transformation that took place over decades. Elena spent the morning moving through different sections of the archive, each one dedicated to a different form of long-term achievement. There was a section devoted to practitioners who had spent years perfecting unusual vocal techniques, developing the ability to sustain sounds for extraordinary periods, or to create complex harmonies using only their natural voice. In the vocal section, Elena met Resonance, a man who had spent 23 years developing the world's longest sustained burp. But as he explained his practice, Elena realized that the achievement was really about breath control, about learning to work with the natural rhythms of the body in ways that most people never explored. The breath, Resonance explained, his voice carrying the deep authority of someone who had learned to speak from his diaphragm, is the bridge between the conscious and unconscious mind, between the voluntary and involuntary functions of the body. When I learned to control my breath in this unusual way, I discovered that I could influence many other aspects of my physical and emotional state. Elena listened as Resonance demonstrated his technique, producing sounds that were musical rather than crude, that seemed to emerge from some deep place within his being and resonate not just in the air, but in the bodies of everyone present. She began to understand that his achievement was really a form of advanced breath work, a practice that had taught him to access states of consciousness that most people could only reach through years of meditation. The archive continued to reveal its treasures as Elena explored deeper. She found a section dedicated to practitioners of extreme patience, people who had spent years working with materials that required extraordinary amounts of time to transform. There was a woman who had spent 15 years creating a sculpture using only the pressure of her breath, slowly eroding a piece of stone through daily practice until it revealed the form that had been hidden within it. This is erosion, Patience explained, leading Elena to a display where the sculptor's daily practice was documented through photographs. She discovered that the most powerful force in the universe is often the gentlest, that consistent, patient pressure applied over time can transform even the most resistant materials. Elena found herself deeply moved by the photographs, which showed not just the gradual transformation of the stone, but the gradual transformation of the sculptor herself over the 15 years of the project. Erosion had clearly found a kind of peace and centeredness that radiated from her being, as if the practice of patient transformation had taught her something profound about her own nature. In another section of the archive, Elena encountered displays documenting achievements that required not just physical dedication, but emotional and spiritual endurance. There was a man who had spent 20 years learning to break toilet seats with his head in increasingly precise and artistic ways, developing his technique until it became a form of performance art that spoke to themes of transformation and the beauty that could be found in destruction. This is transformation, Patience said, indicating a video display where the man's practice was documented. He discovered that the act of controlled destruction could be a form of healing, a way of releasing old patterns and making space for something new to emerge. His achievement is really about the courage to let go of what no longer serves. Elena watched the video with fascination, seeing how transformation had developed his practice not as an act of violence, but as a form of meditation on change itself. Each toilet seat he broke represented something that needed to be released, some old pattern or limitation that was ready to be transformed. The precision and artistry he brought to the practice transformed what could have been crude destruction into something approaching the sacred. As the afternoon progressed, Elena found herself drawn to the archive's most precious collection, a room where the stories of the longest-term practitioners were preserved. These were individuals who had dedicated not just years, but entire lifetimes to their chosen practices, becoming living examples of what was possible when someone committed themselves completely to a path of gentle achievement. In this room, Elena met Lifetime, a woman whose achievement was the integration of all the different practices she had encountered in the archive. Over the course of 50 years, she had grown her nails, extended her hair, developed extraordinary vocal techniques, and mastered various forms of controlled destruction and creation. But her real achievement was the wisdom she had gained through this lifetime of dedicated practice. The secret, Lifetime explained, her presence radiating the kind of peace that comes only from a life fully lived, is understanding that the practice is never really about the achievement itself. The nails, the hair, the sounds, the broken toilet seats. These are all just vehicles for developing qualities that can't be measured or displayed. Patience, persistence, courage, faith, the willingness to continue even when no one understands or appreciates what you're doing. Elena spent the rest of the afternoon learning from Lifetime, who shared stories not just of her own journey, but of all the practitioners she had known over the decades. Each story was a testament to the extraordinary transformation that was possible when someone committed themselves to a practice that required not just skill, but character, not just talent, but the willingness to continue regardless of external recognition or reward. The most remarkable thing, Lifetime continued, is how these practices change not just the practitioner, but everyone around them. When people see someone who has dedicated decades to something beautiful and unusual, it gives them permission to pursue their own authentic path, to invest time and energy in what truly calls to them rather than what others expect of them. As evening approached, the archive settled into its natural rhythm of quiet appreciation. Elena found herself in the central reading room, surrounded by books and documents that chronicled hundreds of achievements requiring extraordinary dedication. But more than the records themselves, she was aware of the presence of all the practitioners who had contributed to this collection. The generations of individuals who had chosen commitment over convenience, depth over speed. The archive had taught Elena something profound about the nature of achievement itself. She had learned that the most meaningful accomplishments were often those that took not just skill, but time, not just talent, but the willingness to continue day after day, year after year, until the practice itself became a form of prayer, a way of expressing devotion to something larger than oneself. As she prepared for sleep, Elena felt her body naturally settling into the rhythm of long-term practice, of daily dedication sustained over time. The archive had shown her that true achievement was not about quick victories or impressive demonstrations, but about the slow, patient work of becoming fully who she was meant to be. She realized that her journey through this garden of gentle records was itself becoming a kind of archive, a collection of experiences and insights that would continue to influence her long after she returned to her ordinary life. Each section she had visited, each practitioner she had met, had contributed to a growing understanding of what it meant to live with dedication, to choose depth over surface, patience over haste. The stars appeared overhead, and Elena felt herself becoming part of the great archive of human experience, her own journey adding to the collection of stories about individuals who had found the courage to pursue their authentic path, regardless of how unusual or difficult it might appear to others. The archive had taught her that dedication was not a burden, but a gift, not a limitation, but a liberation that allowed the deepest aspects of human nature to be expressed and celebrated. Chapter 7: The Sanctuary of Gentle Transformations. The dawn light filtered through crystalline formations that seemed to have grown from the earth overnight, casting rainbow patterns across the ground that shifted and danced with each gentle breeze. Elena awakened to find herself in a part of the garden that felt different from all the others, not because it was more beautiful, but because it seemed to pulse with the energy of change itself, as if the very air was thick with possibility and transformation. The landscape here was neither fixed nor chaotic, but constantly evolving in subtle ways that spoke to the profound transformations that could occur when achievement was pursued not for external recognition, but for the joy of becoming something new. Crystalline structures that might have been buildings or might have been natural formations rose from the earth, their surfaces reflecting not just light, but somehow the inner state of anyone who approached them. As Elena walked along a path that seemed to reshape itself with each step, she encountered a woman whose presence immediately drew her attention. This was Metamorphosis, whose achievement was perhaps the most unusual of all. She had learned to transform her voice in ways that went beyond simple mimicry, actually shifting the fundamental frequency and resonance of her vocal cords to create sounds that seemed to emerge from different dimensions of reality. "Welcome to the sanctuary," Metamorphosis said, and her voice carried within it what sounded like the voices of wind and water, of growing plants and distant stars. "This is where we explore the achievements that change not just what we can do, but who we are in the deepest sense. Every record here is really a record of transformation, of someone discovering that they were capable of becoming something they never imagined possible." Elena found herself immediately drawn into conversation with Metamorphosis, whose voice seemed to create a space around them where normal rules of communication didn't quite apply. When she spoke about her journey, Elena could hear not just her words, but the entire emotional landscape that surrounded them, as if her transformed voice carried frequencies that spoke directly to the listener's heart. The journey began, Metamorphosis explained, when I realized that the voice is not just a tool for communication, but a direct expression of consciousness itself. When I learned to transform my voice, I discovered that I was actually transforming my entire way of being in the world. Each new sound I learned to make revealed a new aspect of who I could become. As they walked together through the sanctuary, Elena began to notice other practitioners whose achievements represented different forms of gentle transformation. There was evolution. A man who had learned to modify his breathing patterns in ways that allowed him to sustain sounds for extraordinary periods, but whose real achievement was the way. This practice had transformed his entire relationship with time and patience. Breath evolution explained, his voice carrying the deep resonance of someone who had learned to speak from the very center of his being. Is the most intimate relationship we have with the world around us. When I learned to extend and modify my breathing, I discovered that I was actually learning to dance with life itself, to find harmony with rhythms that most people never even notice. Elena watched as evolution demonstrated some of his techniques, producing sounds that seemed to emerge not just from his throat, but from his entire body, creating resonances that she could feel in her own chest and abdomen. But more than the sounds themselves, she was struck by the quality of presence he had developed. The way his transformed breathing had clearly taught him to be fully present in each moment. The sanctuary continued to reveal its treasures as Elena explored deeper. She encountered a woman named Flexibility, whose achievement was the development of extraordinary vocal range and control that allowed her to break toilet seats using only the power of her voice. But as Flexibility explained her practice, Elena realized that the real achievement was the integration of breath, intention, and focused energy that the practice required. Sound, Flexibility explained, her voice demonstrating incredible range and power even in normal conversation. Is energy made audible? When I learned to focus my voice in ways that could affect physical objects, I was really learning to focus my entire life force, to direct my energy with precision and purpose. Elena spent time learning from Flexibility, discovering that the techniques she used were really applications of principles that could be applied to any area of life. The focused intention required to break objects with sound was the same quality of focused intention that could be used to break through any kind of limitation or obstacle. As the morning progressed, Elena found herself drawn to a section of the sanctuary where the transformations became increasingly subtle and profound. Here, she met practitioners whose achievements were not just about developing unusual abilities, but about using those abilities as vehicles for deep personal transformation. there was resonance, whose journey with extended burping had evolved into a practice of internal sound healing. Using the vibrations she could create within her own body to facilitate profound states of relaxation and healing. When she demonstrated her technique, Elena felt waves of peace washing through her entire nervous system, as if the sounds were somehow tuning her body to its natural frequency of health and well-being. The body resonance explained, her voice carrying undertones that seemed to resonate in Elena's bones, is a musical instrument, and like any instrument, it can fall out of tune. These sounds I've learned to make are really tuning techniques, ways of helping the body remember its natural harmony. The burping record was just the beginning. The real achievement was learning to use these abilities for healing. Elena found herself profoundly moved by this demonstration. She had never considered that the unusual achievements she had been collecting stories about might have therapeutic applications, might be ways of accessing forms of healing that were not available through conventional means. The most remarkable practitioner Elena encountered in the sanctuary was a man named Integration, whose achievement was the synthesis of all the different transformation techniques he had learned over decades of practice. He had developed the ability to use his voice, his breath, his focused intention, and his understanding of resonance to create what he called transformation chambers, spaces where others could experience their own gentle metamorphosis. The secret, Integration explained, his presence creating an almost visible field of peace and possibility around him, is understanding that all of these unusual achievements are really doorways into the same fundamental experience. The experience of discovering that we are not fixed beings, but flowing, creative expressions of consciousness that can transform ourselves and our world through dedicated practice. Elena spent the afternoon learning from Integration, experiencing firsthand how the techniques developed by all the practitioners she had met could be combined and integrated to create profound experiences of transformation. In the space that Integration created through his integrated practice, Elena felt layers of old limitation and self-doubt simply dissolving, replaced by a sense of expansive possibility and creative potential. Every person, Integration continued, has their own unique pathway to transformation. For some, it's growing their fingernails or hair for decades. For others, it's learning to make extraordinary sounds or to break objects in precise ways. The external achievement is just a vehicle. The real transformation happens internally as the person discovers capacities they never knew they had. As the afternoon deepened, Elena found herself participating in what the practitioners called the transformation circle. a gathering where everyone shared not their achievements, but the internal changes that their practices had created. She listened with wonder as each person described how their unusual pursuit had transformed not just their abilities, but their entire way of being in the world. Metamorphosis shared how learning to transform her voice had taught her that identity itself was fluid, that she could choose who to become in each moment rather than being trapped by old patterns and limitations. Evolution described how extending his breath and sound had expanded his sense of time, allowing him to live with a patience and presence that had transformed all his relationships. Flexibility spoke about how learning to break objects with sound had taught her that apparent limitations were often just invitations to find new ways of approaching challenges. Resonance explained how developing her unusual vocal abilities had led to a deep understanding of healing and the ways that sound could be used to restore harmony and balance. But perhaps most beautiful of all was the way these individual transformations had created a collective field of possibility, a space where everyone present felt supported in their own process of becoming. Elena realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented, a community of individuals who had learned to use achievement not as a way of competing with others, but as a way of supporting each other's transformation. As evening approached, the sanctuary began to reveal its most profound secret. The crystalline structures that Elena had noticed throughout the day began to glow with a soft, internal light. And she realized that they were not buildings at all, but physical manifestations of the transformation energy that the practitioners had been generating through their dedicated practice. This is what happens, integration explained. When a group of people commits to transformation, not just for themselves, but for the benefit of all, the energy we generate through our practice doesn't just change us, it changes the environment itself, creating spaces where transformation becomes easier and more natural for everyone. Elena felt tears of recognition gathering in her eyes as she understood what she was witnessing. The sanctuary of gentle transformations was not just a place where unusual achievements were practiced. It was a place where the very nature of achievement had been transformed, where individual accomplishment had been alchemized into collective healing and growth. As she prepared for sleep, Elena felt her entire being reorganizing itself around the new understanding she had gained. The sanctuary had taught her that transformation was not just possible, but natural, not just individual, but collective, not just about changing what she could do, but about discovering who she truly was beneath all the layers of limitation and conditioning. She realized that her journey through this garden of gentle records was itself a transformation, a process of discovering capabilities and perspectives she never knew she had. Each section of the garden had revealed different aspects of human potential. But the sanctuary had shown her that all these potentials were really different expressions of the same fundamental capacity. The capacity to transform, to grow, to become ever more fully who she was meant to be. The stars appeared overhead, and Elena felt herself becoming part of the great transformation that was always occurring. The constant creative evolution of consciousness, expressing itself through countless individual lives and achievements. The sanctuary had taught her that achievement was not about reaching a fixed goal, but about participating in the ongoing creation of new possibilities, new ways of being, new expressions of the beautiful, inexhaustible creativity that was the true nature of existence itself. Chapter 8: The Pavilion of Harmonious Communities. The morning light seemed to carry music within it, gentle harmonies that Elena could almost hear as she awakened in a grove, where the trees themselves appeared to be arranged in perfect acoustic patterns. The landscape here felt different from all the previous sections, not because it was more beautiful, but because it seemed to resonate with the energy of many voices joined together, many individual achievements woven into something larger and more magnificent than any could have been alone. As Elena walked along paths that curved and intersected like the lines of a vast musical composition, she began to understand that she had entered a part of the garden dedicated not to individual achievements, but to the magic that occurred when practitioners of gentle records came together to support and inspire each other. The very air seemed to hum with collaborative energy, with the joy that arose when people discovered they were not alone in their unusual pursuits. The first structure she encountered was unlike anything she had seen before. A circular pavilion that seemed to have been grown rather than built. Its walls formed from living trees whose branches had been guided over decades to create perfect acoustics. As she approached, Elena could hear the gentle murmur of voices engaged in what sounded like the most peaceful conversation imaginable. Inside the pavilion, she found a gathering of practitioners representing every type of achievement she had encountered on her journey. There was someone with extraordinarily long fingernails sitting next to someone who specialized in breaking toilet seats with their head. But there was no sense of competition or comparison between them. Instead, there was a quality of mutual appreciation and support that created a field of extraordinary peace and acceptance. A woman approached Elena with the graceful bearing of someone who had learned to move through the world as if participating in a dance. This was Harmony, whose own achievement was perhaps the most subtle of all. She had developed the ability to help other practitioners discover how their individual achievements could support and enhance each other's work. "Welcome to the Pavilion," Harmony said, her voice carrying the kind of warmth that made Elena feel immediately at home. "This is where we gather to celebrate not our individual records, but the magic that happens when people who understand the value of gentle dedication come together to support each other's journey." Elena settled into the circle, immediately feeling embraced by the quality of attention and acceptance that surrounded her. She noticed that when people spoke here, they were truly listened to, not just heard, but received with the kind of presence that allowed them to share their deepest experiences without fear of judgment or misunderstanding. "The remarkable thing," Harmony continued, "is that when practitioners of gentle achievements come together, something new emerges that none of us could create alone. Our individual records become part of a larger symphony, a collective expression of what's possible when human beings choose dedication over distraction, depth over superficiality." As the morning progressed, Elena witnessed this symphony in action. She watched as a man with extraordinarily long hair worked with a woman who specialized in controlled burping to create a performance that was both visually and auditorily stunning. The flowing movement of his hair created visual rhythms that perfectly complemented the musical rhythms she produced with her voice, creating something that was neither hair achievement nor sound achievement, but something entirely new. "This is what we call collaborative achievement," Harmony explained as they watched the performance. "Each person brings their individual mastery, but they use it in service of creating something beautiful together, rather than competing to see who is best. The result is always more magnificent than what any of us could accomplish alone." Elena found herself deeply moved by what she was witnessing. In her regular life, she had often felt isolated in her interests, as if her fascination with unusual achievements made her somehow odd or different from others. Here, she was discovering what it felt like to be part of a community where her interests were not just accepted, but celebrated, where her unique perspective was valued as an essential contribution to the collective understanding. As the day continued, Elena encountered various groups of practitioners who had discovered ways to weave their individual achievements into collaborative projects. There was a quartet of people with different vocal abilities who had learned to create complex harmonies that incorporated traditional singing, extended burping, and other unusual sound techniques. Their music was unlike anything Elena had ever heard, hauntingly beautiful in a way that spoke to something deep in her soul. The beauty of collaborative achievement, one of the quartet members explained, is that it teaches us that our individual gifts gifts are not meant to set us apart from others, but to allow us to contribute something unique to the whole. When I learned to see my unusual vocal abilities not as something that made me different, but as something that allowed me to serve the music we create together, everything changed. Elena spent time with a group of practitioners who had discovered that their various physical achievements, nail growing, hair growing, controlled breaking, could be combined to create elaborate performance art pieces that told stories about transformation, patience, and the beauty of allowing natural processes to unfold. Watching them work together, Elena was struck by the way their individual mastery had evolved into something approaching the sacred. What we've discovered, one of the performers explained, is that these unusual achievements are really metaphors for the deeper processes of life itself. When we combine them in performance, we're creating visual and auditory poetry that speaks to universal themes of growth, change, and the courage to be authentically ourselves. The most remarkable group Elena encountered was a collective of practitioners who had developed what they called healing achievements, ways of using their unusual abilities specifically to help others find peace, release trauma, and discover their own unique gifts. A woman with extraordinarily long nails had learned to use them for the most gentle and precise massage work. A man who could break objects with his head had developed techniques for helping people symbolically break through emotional barriers. The ultimate achievement, the massage practitioner explained as she demonstrated her technique, is learning to use whatever gifts we've developed in service of others' healing and growth. These nails took decades to grow, but their real purpose became clear only when I discovered how to use them to help people release tension and find peace. Elena experienced firsthand the healing potential of these collaborative achievements when the group invited her to participate in what they called a gentle transformation session. Using combinations of sound, touch, and movement techniques that each practitioner had developed through their individual achievements, they created an experience that left Elena feeling more relaxed and centered than she had in years. The secret, one of the practitioners explained, is understanding that all of our achievements are really different expressions of the same fundamental impulse: the desire to transform limitation into possibility, to express our authentic nature regardless of what others might think, to contribute something beautiful and unique to the world. As the afternoon progressed, Elena found herself participating in the collaborative creation of a new performance piece, drawing on insights from all the different sections of the garden she had visited. The group invited her to contribute her own unique perspective, her gift for seeing the deeper meaning in gentle achievements, her ability to recognize the profound humanity that lay beneath even the most unusual pursuits, working with practitioners whose individual achievements spanned decades of dedication. Elena helped create what they called a story symphony, a performance that used sound, movement, and visual elements to tell the story of her journey through the garden, but more than just recounting her experiences. The piece became a celebration of the transformative power of dedication, patience, and the courage to pursue one's authentic path regardless of external expectations. What we're creating together, Harmony observed as they worked, is proof that unusual achievements are not about being strange or different, but about being courageously human. Each person's journey toward their gentle record has been a journey toward becoming more fully themselves. And when we share these journeys with each other, we create permission for others to do the same. As the performance took shape, Elena found herself understanding something profound about the nature of community itself. The Pavilion had shown her that true community was not about people who were all the same coming together, but about people who were deeply committed to their own authentic development, supporting each other in that commitment. The practitioners here had learned that their unusual achievements were not barriers to connection, but bridges to it. When someone had spent decades growing their fingernails or perfecting their ability to break toilet seats with their head, they had developed qualities of patience, dedication, and courage that could inspire and support others on their own paths of authentic development. As evening approached, the entire community gathered in the central pavilion for what they called the celebration of gentle achievements. Elena watched in wonder as hundreds of practitioners shared the stage, each contributing their unique gift to a collective expression that was breathtakingly beautiful in its diversity and unity. She saw the woman with the longest fingernails creating visual poetry with her movements, her nails catching the light and creating patterns that told stories of patience and persistence. She watched the man who specialized in toilet seat breaking use his precise control to create percussive rhythms that provided the foundation for an elaborate musical composition. But perhaps most beautiful of all was the way the audience participated. This was not a performance with passive observers, but a celebration where everyone present was invited to contribute their own unique voice, their own authentic expression, their own celebration of the courage to be deeply and unapologetically themselves. This is what we call the achievement of achievements, Harmony explained as the celebration continued around them. It's the recognition that individual accomplishment reaches its highest expression when it becomes a gift to the community, when personal mastery becomes a form of service to the collective healing and growth. Elena found herself deeply moved by the realization that her journey through the garden had been leading to this moment, not to the achievement of her own gentle record, but to the understanding that the highest achievement was learning to use whatever gifts one had developed in service of creating more beauty, more healing, more possibility in the world. As the celebration reached its crescendo, Elena felt something shifting inside her. She realized that she no longer saw herself as an observer of gentle achievements, but as a potential practitioner, someone who had her own unique contribution to make to this extraordinary community of dedicated individuals. The Pavilion had taught her that achievement was not about individual success, but about collective flourishing, not about standing apart, but about standing together, not about being the best, but about being authentic, and using that authenticity to support others in discovering their own genuine path. As the evening settled into peaceful appreciation, Elena found herself surrounded by new friends who understood something that the outside world often seemed to miss: that the most profound achievements were often the gentlest, that the most meaningful records were those that measured not speed or strength, but patience and persistence, that the greatest accomplishments were those that helped others discover their own capacity for beauty and transformation. The stars appeared overhead, and Elena realized that she had found something she hadn't even known. She was looking for a community where her deepest interests were not just tolerated, but celebrated, where her unique perspective was valued as an essential contribution to the collective understanding of what it meant to live with dedication and authenticity. The Pavilion had shown her that the Garden of Gentle Records was not just a place, but a way of being, not just a collection of unusual achievements, but a living demonstration of what became possible when people chose to support each other's authentic development, rather than competing for limited resources or recognition. As she prepared for sleep, Elena felt her heart expanding with gratitude for all the practitioners who had shared their stories and achievements with her. She understood now that their individual records were really love letters to the world, expressions of faith in the value of patience, dedication, and the courage to be genuinely oneself regardless of what others might think. Chapter 9: The Garden of Integration and Wisdom. The morning light arrived with the quality of understanding itself, soft and all-encompassing, revealing a landscape that seemed to synthesize everything Elena had experienced on her journey through the Garden of Gentle Records. Here, the different sections she had visited were not separate territories, but facets of a single, magnificent whole. A place where the wisdom gained through decades of patient achievement had been woven together into something approaching the sacred. Elena found herself walking along paths that spiraled gently upward, each turn revealing new perspectives on the sections of the garden she had already explored. She could see the sound sanctuary in the distance, its natural amphitheater still resonating with the memory of healing vibrations. Beyond that, the Hall of Gentle Strength stood like a monument to the power of understanding force and resistance. The Observatory glimmered in the morning light, its crystalline structures continuing to reveal new dimensions of visual possibility. But here, in this central garden of integration, Elena began to understand that all these different achievements were really expressions of the same fundamental truth: that human beings were capable of transformation beyond anything they typically imagined, and that the key to accessing this transformation was not force or speed, but patience, dedication, and the willingness to trust natural processes. A figure approached along the spiraling path, moving with the kind of grace that comes from having integrated decades of different practices into a unified way of being. This was Synthesis, whose achievement was perhaps the most subtle and profound of all: the ability to help others understand how their individual gifts and interests could be woven together into a life of meaning and service. "Welcome to the heart of the garden," Synthesis said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to include all the different voices Elena had heard on her journey. "This is where we come to understand that every gentle achievement is really a doorway into the same essential experience, the experience of discovering who we truly are when we stop trying to be what others expect and start becoming what our deepest nature calls us to be." As they walked together through the integration garden, Elena noticed that the landscape itself seemed to embody the principles she had been learning. Plants that had taken years to reach their full expression grew alongside others that transformed quickly, creating a living demonstration that different beings had different natural rhythms, and that beauty lay in honoring these differences rather than trying to force uniformity. The wisdom that emerges from gentle achievements, Synthesis explained, is not specific to any particular practice, but applies to every aspect of human life. When someone spends decades growing their fingernails, they're not just creating a record, they're learning about patience, about trust in natural processes, about the courage to pursue their authentic path regardless of what others think. These same qualities can transform every relationship, every creative project, every challenge they encounter. Elena found herself nodding in recognition. Her journey through the garden had indeed been teaching her principles that went far beyond the specific achievements she had witnessed. She had learned about the power of consistency, the beauty of allowing things to unfold in their own time, the importance of community support, and the profound satisfaction that came from pursuing something meaningful regardless of external recognition. As they continued walking, Elena encountered practitioners she had met in other sections of the garden. But here, she saw them in a new light. The woman with the extraordinarily long fingernails was teaching a group of visitors about the meditation of daily care. How the simple act of tending to something beautiful could become a practice that cultivated patience and presence in every aspect of life. When I began growing my nails, she was explaining to her audience, I thought I was just pursuing an unusual hobby. But over the years, I discovered that the daily practice of caring for them was teaching me how to care for everything in my life with the same attention and patience. My relationships, my work, my health, everything improved when I applied the same principles I had learned through this gentle achievement. Nearby, the man who specialized in breaking toilet seats with his head was demonstrating how his practice had taught him about the precise application of force. But he was applying these lessons to conflict resolution and communication. Elena watched in fascination as he showed visitors how understanding the exact amount of pressure needed to break through resistance had taught him how to address difficult conversations and challenging situations with exactly the right amount of energy. Not too little, not too much, but precisely what was needed to create positive transformation. Every achievement in this garden, Synthesis observed, is really a laboratory for developing human potential. The specific form, whether it's growing nails or extending vocal range or breaking objects with precision, is just the vehicle. The real achievement is the development of qualities that make life more beautiful, more meaningful, more connected. As the morning progressed, Elena found herself participating in what the practitioners called wisdom circles, gatherings where people shared not their records or techniques, but the life lessons they had learned through their practices. She listened with wonder as each person described how their unusual achievement had become a doorway into a completely transformed way of living. A woman who had spent 20 years developing extraordinary vocal abilities shared how her practice had taught her to listen more deeply, to speak more thoughtfully, to use her voice in service of healing rather than just communication. A man whose achievement was the cultivation of perfect balance explained how learning to find physical equilibrium had taught him emotional and spiritual balance that had transformed every aspect of his existence. The beautiful thing, one practitioner observed, is that once you understand these principles through one practice, you can apply them everywhere. The patience I learned growing my hair has made me a better parent, a better friend, a better member of my community. The precision I developed through my unusual achievements has improved my cooking, my gardening, my ability to solve problems at work. Elena began to understand that the integration garden was not just a place where different achievements were celebrated, but where the wisdom gained through gentle records was being translated into principles that could benefit anyone, regardless of whether they chose to pursue unusual achievements themselves. In one corner of the garden, she discovered a group of practitioners working with visitors who had come seeking guidance for their own life challenges. Using the insights they had gained through their gentle achievements, they were helping people understand how the same principles of patience, dedication, and authentic expression could be applied to any situation. Elena watched as a woman struggling with a difficult relationship received guidance from someone whose achievement was the cultivation of extraordinary patience through sound work. The advice was not abstract, but practical, rooted in the lived experience of someone who had learned to sustain attention and commitment through years of dedicated practice. The key insight, the sound practitioner explained, is understanding that transformation happens not through force, but through consistency. Just as my vocal abilities developed through daily practice over years, relationships heal and grow through small, consistent acts of love and understanding rather than dramatic gestures or attempts to force change. As the afternoon deepened, Elena found herself drawn to the center of the integration garden, where a magnificent tree grew that seemed to embody all the principles she had been learning. Its roots reached deep into the earth, demonstrating the kind of grounding that came from long-term practice. Its trunk showed the strength that developed through patient consistency. Its branches reached in all directions, illustrating how individual achievement could support and shelter others. Beneath this tree, she found Synthesis sitting in peaceful meditation, her presence radiating the kind of integration that came from having woven together decades of different practices into a unified understanding. When she opened her eyes, Elena felt as though she was being seen not just as she was, but as she could become. The ultimate achievement, Synthesis said, her voice carrying the deep authority of someone who had discovered profound truths through lived experience, is not any particular record or ability, but the integration of all our experiences into wisdom that can serve life itself. Every person who pursues a gentle achievement with dedication and love is contributing to the collective understanding of human potential. Elena spent the rest of the afternoon learning from Synthesis, who shared stories of practitioners who had taken the wisdom gained through their achievements and used it to create positive change in their communities. She learned about former record holders who had become teachers, healers, counselors, and community leaders. Using the patience, dedication, and authenticity they had developed through their practices to serve others. This is why we call them gentle achievements, Synthesis explained. Not because they are easy. Many of them require extraordinary dedication, but because they are pursued in harmony with natural principles rather than in opposition to them. And this gentleness extends outward, creating more gentleness in the world, more patience, more appreciation for the unique gifts that each person brings. As evening approached, the integration garden revealed its most beautiful secret. All the practitioners Elena had met on her journey gathered in a great circle beneath the central tree, not to display their achievements, but to share the wisdom they had gained through their practices. Each person offered a teaching, an insight, a gift of understanding that had emerged from their years of gentle dedication. Elena listened with tears of recognition as each practitioner spoke. She heard teachings about patience from those who had grown fingernails for decades, insights about precision from those who had mastered controlled braking, wisdom about authentic expression from those who had developed unusual vocal abilities, and understanding about community from those who had learned to use their achievements in service of others. But perhaps most beautiful of all was the realization that she, too, had something to contribute. Her journey through the garden had given her a unique perspective on the wisdom that gentle achievements could offer, and the practitioners welcomed her insights with the same appreciation they showed for each other's contributions. You see, Synthesis said as the sharing concluded, every person who recognizes the value in gentle achievements, who understands that patience and dedication are worthy of celebration, who appreciates the courage it takes to pursue one's authentic path, every such person is contributing to the transformation of human consciousness itself. Elena felt something profound settling into her understanding as the stars appeared overhead. The integration garden had shown her that her journey through the world of gentle records was not separate from her ordinary life, but was a way of bringing more wisdom, patience, and authenticity to everything she did. As she prepared for sleep beneath the great tree, Elena realized that she had found what she had been seeking without even knowing she was looking for it. Not just stories about unusual achievements, but a complete philosophy of living that honored the value of patience, celebrated uniqueness, and recognized that the most profound transformations often happened not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through gentle, consistent dedication to what called to the soul. The garden of integration had taught her that achievement was not about reaching a destination, but about becoming more fully who she was meant to be. Not about competing with others, but about contributing her unique gifts to the collective flowering of human potential. She understood now that her fascination with gentle records was really a recognition of these deeper truths, and that her journey through the garden had been a journey toward integrating these truths into her own life. Chapter 10: The Circle of Eternal Return. The final morning in the garden arrived with the quality of both ending and beginning. The light carrying within it the golden warmth of completion and the silver promise of new journeys yet to unfold. Elena awakened beneath the great tree of integration, feeling as though every cell in her body had been gently reorganized around the wisdom she had absorbed during her journey through the various sanctuaries of gentle achievement. As she sat up and looked around, Elena realized that the garden was revealing its final secret, the understanding that every ending was really a return to the beginning. But at a deeper level of understanding, the path that stretched before her was the same path she had first walked when she entered the garden. But she was no longer the same person who would walk it. A familiar figure approached through the morning mist. It was Synthesis. But Elena now understood that Synthesis was not just one practitioner among many, but the embodiment of the garden's essential wisdom, the living demonstration of what became possible when all forms of gentle achievement were integrated into a unified understanding of human potential. The time has come, Synthesis said, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had guided countless seekers through this same journey of discovery. For you to understand the final teaching of the gentle records, everything you have experienced here, every practitioner you have met, every wisdom you have gained, all of this exists not just in this garden, but in the world you came from, waiting to be recognized and celebrated. Elena felt a stirring of understanding as Synthesis led her to a viewpoint she had not noticed before, a place where the entire garden was visible in a single sweeping panorama. From this perspective, Elena could see how all the different sections connected, how the path she had walked formed a perfect spiral that had brought her not to a different place, but to a deeper understanding of the place where she had always been. The garden of gentle records, Synthesis explained, is not separate from your ordinary world, but is your ordinary world seen with eyes that have learned to recognize the extraordinary potential that lives within every human being, every person you meet, every story you encounter. Every moment of your daily life contains the same possibilities for transformation and achievement that you have witnessed here. As Elena absorbed this teaching, she began to see figures materializing throughout the garden. Not the practitioners she had met during her journey, but people from her ordinary life, transformed by the recognition of their own gentle achievements. She saw her elderly neighbor, whose patient cultivation of roses was revealed as a form of meditation equal to any she had witnessed. She saw her colleague, who had spent years perfecting her ability to listen, developing what was truly an extraordinary achievement in human connection. You see, synthesis continued. The world is full of gentle achievements that go unrecognized because they don't fit conventional definitions of success or accomplishment. The mother who has spent decades cultivating patience with her children, the teacher who has developed extraordinary ability to help others learn, the friend who has mastered the art of presence. These are all gentle records, all expressions of the same dedication and wisdom you have encountered here. Elena felt tears of recognition flowing down her cheeks as she understood the profound truth of what synthesis was sharing. Her journey through the garden had not been an escape from ordinary life, but a preparation for returning to it with new eyes, with the ability to recognize and celebrate the gentle achievements that surrounded her every day. But there is more, synthesis said, guiding Elena to a pool of water so clear and still that it seemed to hold the essence of peace itself. Look into the water and see what you have become through this journey. Elena approached the pool with anticipation, and as she looked into its depths, she saw not just her reflection, but the accumulation of all the wisdom she had gained. She saw herself as someone who had learned to recognize patience as a form of strength, dedication as a form of art, authenticity as a form of service. She saw herself as a keeper of gentle records, someone whose role was not to achieve unusual things herself, but to appreciate and support the unusual achievements of others. Your gentle achievement, synthesis explained, is the cultivation of appreciation itself, the development of eyes that can see the extraordinary within the ordinary, the heart that can recognize the profound dedication that lives within every authentic human pursuit. This is as rare and valuable as any record in our archives. Elena felt a deep sense of completion as she understood her own place in the great web of gentle achievements. She had not come to the garden to break records or develop unusual abilities, but to develop the capacity to recognize and celebrate these things wherever they appeared. Her achievement was the achievement of understanding itself, the record of appreciation, the extraordinary ability to see the beauty in every form of patient dedication. As the morning progressed, Elena found herself participating in what synthesis called the ceremony of return, a ritual in which every visitor to the garden formally integrated their experiences and prepared to carry the wisdom back into their ordinary lives. But Elena discovered that this was not a ceremony of goodbye, but of deeper connection, a recognition that the garden would continue to exist wherever people chose to see their world through the lens of gentle achievement. Other figures joined them for the ceremony, Some were practitioners Elena had met during her journey, but others were visitors like herself who had come seeking understanding and were now preparing to return as carriers of wisdom. Each person shared their intention for how they would embody the garden's teachings in their daily life. Elena listened as a businessman spoke about transforming his understanding of success to include patience and authenticity alongside profit and efficiency. A teacher shared her intention to recognize and celebrate the unique achievements of each of her students. Understanding that conventional measures of academic success captured only a small fraction of human potential. When Elena's turn came, she found herself speaking with a clarity and confidence that surprised her. "I intend to become a chronicler of gentle achievements," she said, her voice carrying the resonance of someone who had found her true calling. "I will continue to collect stories of patient dedication and unusual accomplishment. But now, I understand that my role is not just to record these stories, but to help others recognize their own capacity for gentle achievement." Synthesis nodded with the satisfaction of someone seeing a seed she had planted beginning to bloom. "And in doing so," she said, "you will be creating new gardens wherever you go, helping others discover that they too are capable of extraordinary dedication when they find what truly calls to their authentic nature." As the ceremony concluded, Elena began to understand the final mystery of the garden. It was not a place that existed separate from the ordinary world, but a way of seeing that could transform any environment into a sanctuary of possibility. The practices she had witnessed, the wisdom she had gained, the community she had experienced, all of this was available wherever people chose to value patience over speed, depth over surface, authenticity over conformity. "The circle is complete," Synthesis said as they walked together toward the place where Elena's journey had begun. But completion in the garden of gentle records means not ending, but return to your world with new understanding. Return to your daily life with expanded vision. Return to your relationships with deeper appreciation for the unique achievements that every person carries within them. Elena felt her body naturally beginning to settle into the rhythm of return. But it was not the return of someone who had been absent, but of someone who had discovered new dimensions of the place where she had always been. She understood now that her apartment, her neighborhood, her daily routines, all of these were part of the same garden, waiting to be seen with eyes that had learned to recognize the gentle achievements that surrounded her every day. As they reached the edge of the garden, Elena turned for one last look at the landscape that had transformed her understanding of achievement, community, and possibility. But what she saw was not a place she was leaving, but a vision of what any place could become when approached with the right understanding. Remember, Synthesis said, her words carrying the weight of final teaching. The garden of gentle records exists wherever people choose to pursue their authentic nature with patience and dedication, wherever communities form to support each other's unique gifts, wherever achievements are measured not by their ability to impress others, but by their capacity to transform the achiever into a more complete expression of their essential nature. Elena nodded, feeling the truth of these words settling into her bones like a blessing. She understood now that her journey was not ending, but beginning. That every day would offer new opportunities to recognize, celebrate, and support the gentle achievements that made life beautiful and meaningful. As she stepped across the threshold that led back to her ordinary world, Elena carried with her not just memories of extraordinary achievements, but a complete transformation of her understanding of what it meant to live a life of purpose and dedication. She had learned that the most profound records were often the gentlest, that the greatest achievements were those that served not the ego but the soul, and that the ultimate accomplishment was learning to live in harmony with one's deepest nature while supporting others in doing the same. The garden of gentle records had taught her that she was already living in a world of infinite possibility, surrounded by practitioners of patience and dedication, whose achievements were no less extraordinary for being uncommon or unconventional. Her role was to recognize these achievements, celebrate them, and through her appreciation, help create the conditions where more people felt safe to pursue their own authentic paths. As Elena returned to her familiar surroundings, she carried within her the understanding that transformation was not about becoming someone different, but about becoming more fully who she had always been meant to be. The garden had shown her that every human being was capable of gentle achievement when they found the courage to pursue what truly called to them, and that a world where such achievements were recognized and celebrated would be a world transformed by patience, authenticity, and the profound beauty of human dedication, expressed in countless unique and wonderful ways. Epilogue, the keeper of stories. Elena opened her eyes in her favorite armchair, the leather-bound journal still resting in her lap. But everything had changed. The apartment looked the same, the worn wooden floors, the familiar furniture, the streetlights beginning to glow outside her window. But she saw it all through new eyes, eyes that had learned to recognize the extraordinary potential that lived within the most ordinary moments. The journal in her hands no longer felt like a collection of strange stories, but like a sacred text, a guide to understanding the profound beauty that emerged when human beings chose dedication over distraction, depth over superficiality, authentic expression over conventional expectation. Each story she had collected over the years now revealed itself as a doorway into wisdom that could transform not just the achiever, but anyone who took the time to truly understand what they represented. She rose from her chair with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to move through the world as if participating in a dance. Each step an expression of the patience and presence she had discovered during her journey through the garden. Walking to her window, Elena looked out at her neighborhood with vision that had been fundamentally transformed by her experiences. Across the street, she saw Mrs. Chen tending to her roses in the evening light, and Elena now recognized this daily practice as a form of meditation, every bit as profound as the achievements she had witnessed in the garden. The care with which Mrs. Chen approached each bloom, the patience she showed in waiting for growth to unfold naturally, the dedication she brought to this practice year after year. These were the hallmarks of gentle achievement, visible to anyone who had learned to see with appreciative eyes. In the window above, she glimpsed her neighbor Tom practicing violin, and Elena understood that his decades of patient practice represented the same qualities of commitment and authentic expression that she had celebrated in the garden. The fact that he would never perform in concert halls didn't diminish the beauty of his achievement. If anything, it enhanced it, demonstrating that the highest accomplishments were often those pursued for the pure joy of becoming more fully oneself. Elena returned to her journal with the understanding that her role as a collector of gentle achievements was just beginning. She had stories to write now that went beyond the official records, stories that recognized the extraordinary dedication that surrounded her every day. She would write about Mrs. Chen's roses, about Tom's violin practice, about the postal worker who had perfected the art of bringing joy to people's days, about the librarian who had developed an almost supernatural ability to match readers with exactly the books they needed. As she began to write, Elena felt herself becoming part of the great tradition of storytellers who had always recognized that the most important stories were often the quietest ones. The tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things through simple dedication to what called to their souls. Her apartment became a sanctuary, a place where gentle achievements were recognized, celebrated, and preserved for others who might need to know that their own unusual interests and persistent practices were worthy of respect and admiration. The telephone rang, and Elena answered to find her friend Sarah on the other end, sounding stressed about a work situation that seemed impossible to resolve. As Elena listened, she heard an opportunity to share some of the wisdom she had gained in the garden. "You know," Elena said gently, I've been learning about the power of approaching challenges the way someone who spent decades growing their fingernails might approach a difficult day, not by forcing or rushing, but by understanding that the most resistant situations often transform through patient, consistent attention rather than dramatic intervention. As they talked, Elena found herself naturally sharing insights from the practitioners she had met, not as abstract advice, but as lived wisdom that had been tested through years of dedicated practice. Sarah's breathing seemed to slow as she absorbed these perspectives. And by the end of their conversation, she had found a new approach to her challenges that honored both efficiency and the deeper rhythms of sustainable change. After the call ended, Elena realized that she had just experienced the true purpose of her journey through the garden. It was not enough to collect stories of gentle achievements. Her role was to become a bridge between the wisdom of patient dedication and the people in her ordinary life who needed to know that there were other ways of approaching their challenges and pursuing their dreams. She spent the evening writing letters to friends and family members, each one crafted to help the recipient recognize their own capacity for gentle achievement. To her nephew, who struggled with conventional measures of academic success, she wrote about the value of developing mastery according to one's own natural timeline. To her elderly father, who felt useless in retirement, she shared stories about practitioners whose greatest achievements had come in their later years, when they finally had the time and freedom to pursue what truly called to them. As the night deepened, Elena established what would become her evening ritual, a time of quiet reflection on the gentle achievements she had witnessed that day, followed by the writing of one new story for her journal. Tonight, she wrote about the grocery store clerk who had spent years perfecting the art of making every customer feel seen and appreciated, developing what was truly an extraordinary achievement in human connection. Before sleep, Elena stepped outside onto her small balcony and looked up at the stars that had watched over her journey through the garden. She understood now that the garden was not a place she had visited, but a way of being that she had learned to embody, not a destination, but a perspective that transformed every environment into a sanctuary of possibility. The gentle achievements that had captured her imagination were not museum pieces to be admired from a distance, but living demonstrations of principles that could be applied to every aspect of life. The patience developed through growing fingernails could be applied to healing relationships. The precision learned through controlled braking could be used to address life's challenges with exactly the right amount of energy. The community support that flourished in the garden could be cultivated wherever people gathered to appreciate rather than compete. Elena felt her eyelids growing heavy with the peaceful tiredness that comes from a day spent in alignment with one's deepest purpose. She had found her calling as a keeper of gentle records, someone whose achievement was not the development of unusual abilities, but the cultivation of appreciation for the unusual abilities that others developed through their patient dedication. As she settled into sleep, Elena carried with her the understanding that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to recognize and celebrate the gentle achievements that made life beautiful. She would continue to collect stories, but now she understood that every story she gathered was really a love letter to the human capacity for transformation, a demonstration of what became possible when people found the courage to pursue their authentic nature, regardless of whether others understood or appreciated their choice. The journal rested on her nightstand, its pages filled with stories of fingernails grown with love, sounds created with joy, objects broken with precision, and communities formed around the shared, understanding that the most meaningful achievements were often the gentlest. But Elena knew that the real story was just beginning the story of how one person's appreciation for gentle achievements could ripple outward to create more recognition, more support, and more celebration of the extraordinary dedication that existed everywhere, waiting only for eyes that had learned to see and hearts that had learned to appreciate the beautiful, patient, persistent expression of human authenticity in all its magnificent forms. In her dreams that night, Elena walked again through the garden of gentle records. But now, she was not a visitor, but a resident, someone whose daily practice was the recognition and celebration of the extraordinary achievements that surrounded her in every moment of her ordinary, extraordinary life. The garden had taught her that achievement was not about reaching a destination, but about becoming more fully who she was meant to be, and that the highest accomplishment was learning to support others in their own journey toward authentic self-expression. The stars continued their ancient dance overhead, witnesses to another soul who had discovered that the most profound transformations often happened not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through gentle, persistent dedication to what called to the deepest parts of the human spirit. Elena slept the sleep of someone who had found her true work in the world, the sacred task of recognizing, preserving, and sharing the stories of gentle achievement that reminded everyone that they too were capable of extraordinary dedication when they found the courage to pursue what truly called to them.